In working with the black projects, I was picked because I was very strong mentally. I was involved in something very controversial in building another base inside of Dulce, New Mexico, which is Los Alamos Laboratory. On the southwest part of the Archuleta Mesa, we built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground. To our total surprise, first of all, the government knew all about it. They didn't tell anybody. When I saw Green Beret and Black Beret people encamped inside of our geologist camp, I knew something was up. The gig was up. First of all, I knew all about the alien agenda. I'll explain that in a few minutes. The large alien grays had been encamped there for as best as believed possible about 400 or 500 years. Had been one of their internal bases. And we'd drilled holes right on top of it. All the stinking air, all the black sooty air came right out as soon as the first hole was sunk, and all this soot came up. And well, that's when all the hell broke loose, really. All started. Anyway, after we drilled all 4 holes, it took about 2 days to drill all 4 of them. And when you build an underground base, you drill 4 basic holes, and then you build called stopes or cross-member holes across, and then you use blasting equipment, special blasting equipment by the analyzation of the rock formation, and you literally blast out or tunnel out or deflagrate or melt rock out to build the large rooms that are required for this underground base. Well, in this process, I was lowered down the basket of one of these holes, and about from me to this elderly woman here in the front was sitting a 7-foot-tall alien gray. The stench was worse than the worst garbage can you can imagine. The person or the entity was absolutely horrible. I didn't waste any time. I reached for my pistol. At that time, as an engineer, I didn't have time to carry all the folderol of one of these big submachine guns that all the sea spray and the yellow fruit and all the outer perimeter and inner perimeter security people carried. I carried a little Walther PPK pistol with a 9-shot clip. This is in late August of 1979. Now, you got a regular suit of clothes, you got a regular clothes on, plus you're in almost like a spacesuit environment, and you're reaching for a gun. It's not the easiest thing to do, and then to pop a clip in it and start shooting. And I killed 2 of them. Yes, they're mortal, and they do die. However, in the process, one of them did this. All I remember is that he just kind of waved his hand in front of his chest, and the next thing I know, this blue beam hit me and just literally opened me up like a fish. And burnt my fingers right off of me, and it was some form of electrical force, because the kind of like being hit by a lightning bolt burned all my toenails off of me, completely crispy crittered my left foot, burnt the shoe right off of me. All I remember was the smoking remains, and I'm still conscious, but in and out of, I didn't remember much. And there was a Green Beret that was right behind me that risked his life. In fact, he died. But he risked his life. He shoved me back in the basket and hit the button and took me up. And I wouldn't be alive talking to you today if it wasn't for him. I'm forever indebted. He lost his life. 66 Secret Service agents, Green Berets, Black Berets, crack troops lost their lives because the government, our United States government, lied to not tell us anything about the alien threat.
Acknowledge it was a homicide. Other than that, I'd like to also mention something about my father. My father was a U-boat captain in Hitler's Navy, and he got captured and taken over. I didn't find this out until about 2 weeks before he died. On his deathbed, he kind of told everybody in total shock. I was one of them. In fact, I didn't believe him. I thought he was kind of in delirium or something like that. And of course, other things have come up since. And so, anyway, he was captured by the French, turned over to the Third Army, the U.S. Third Army, and then U.S. Third Army turned him over to the Navy. And he was a master machinist. Now, that's not a journeyman. A master means they can take a block of metal and make a gun or a watch or some other fine instrument. And he was a master machinist. He later became an MD doctor and part of the aerospace medicine group of the United States Navy. Was instrumental in helping build the USS Nautilus.
Let me answer this I'll answer this in a couple of parts. First of all, the idea of underground bases and underground civilizations. This is a very old idea in human history. Going back even thousands of years, you've got ancient tribes around the world that have made these claims. We would say it's in their myths, but that there are secret caverns, secret races, secret tribes that exist underground. And really, when one talks about, for example, hollow earth theory, that's a lot of what we're talking about here. Not all hollow earth theorists say that the entire earth is hollow. A lot of them will say that there are just substantial caverns under the ground where there are civilizations that are down there. So that's an old idea. You get it in a lot of ancient European,
a small island nation in the center of the Mediterranean Sea. Further evidence of the use of advanced technology on Malta can be found underground. In 1902, construction workers, while building the foundation for several houses, accidentally discovered a mysterious underground sanctuary dating to 2500 BC. Called the Hypogeum, the subterranean structure was revealed to be 3 levels deep, all hewn from solid stone.
It's been estimated that they removed more than 2,000 tons of stone from these subterranean chambers to create a space that beautifully replicates the temples above ground.
Perhaps one of the greatest mysteries concerning the Hypogeum involve the acoustical properties in what is called the Oracle Room.
The acoustic properties within this are absolutely extraordinary, because what happens is that if a person is within the Oracle Room, the way that their voice is carried is heard within the whole of the complex.
The second part of my talk will be aliens and the alien agenda. I've already touched on that. Old alien bases. And like I said, Bikini Island, according to what was studied after the A-bomb blast at some of the caves, that were infested with out-of-place artifacts dealing with UFOs and other kinds of paraphernalia had rock forming around them, so they had been basically an alien junkyard in shallow seas for probably the better part of 10,000 years. So they've been around. That you might call an old alien base. Dulce, New Mexico is another old alien base. The aliens have probably been here the better part of at least 500,000 and maybe as much as several million years, although I have artifacts here which show.
And Native Americans have this tradition. The Tibetans may have the most extensive tradition of this, for all I know. South America traditional tribes have this as well. So that by itself is interesting, and you might ask, why do all of these disparate civilizations have these types of ideas? And I don't have the answer to that, but I can tell that's an old idea.
And then, I guess, in terms of military engineering, the Rock of Gibraltar was tunneled out centuries ago by the British. And even going back further than that, the ancient Egyptians did a lot of tunneling thousands of years ago in Egypt. So the provenance of underground tunneling for a wide variety of purposes goes way back in human history.
Lies Cappadocia in central Turkey. Here, wind and water have sculpted strange shapes out of the soft volcanic rock. Rock which ancient peoples once turned into small primitive dwellings. In more recent years, the site has seen the construction of more modern structures. But in 1963, a simple home renovation in the town of Derinkuyu led to an extraordinary discovery when a cave wall was opened, revealing a passageway to an underground city thousands of years old and more than 280 feet deep.
I've been there on multiple occasions, and it's incredible because there's 13 stories that go deep into the ground with ventilation shafts and 15,000 little shafts that bring air to even the deepest of levels.
Incredibly, the number of rock rooms that were found could hold over 20,000 men, women, and children. There was even evidence of religious centers, storerooms, wine presses, and stables for livestock.
Oh, Derinkuyu would have been a massive undertaking for anyone, even in modern times, with modern equipment. But in those days, it would have been stupendous. Equal to the pyramids. At Derinkuyu, because of the softness of the stone, you had to be very careful that you provided enough pillar strength to support the floors above. Otherwise, you'd have catastrophic cave-ins. Surprisingly, there's no evidence of any catastrophic cave-ins, so they were apparently extremely clever and knew their material. We're talking deep antiquity. It is mind-boggling to understand how they could have done this. Perhaps they had help from some other civilization.
But just who built this massive underground city? And what mysterious force drove them to live underground?
Why would people want to live deep underground in these weird caverns like that? It seems kind of scary.
But what you really get is in the 20th century, where the Nazis and their predecessors, let's call them the Dulce Society, which was a kind of a mystical sect that the Nazis really drew a lot out of in forming their own ideology. The Dulce Society was very interested in Tibetan myths about openings into the earth that describes this idea of deep underground tunnels, bases, crisscrossing the world. And since this was a Tibetan idea, we have to assume that the Nazis themselves were familiar with this idea as well. So the idea in the Tibetan tradition, from what I have understood about it, is that there are different races below the surface of the earth, including reptoid or reptilian races that are supposedly from other worlds. I'm not making this up. This is right out of, in fact, I do recall in the source that I read is in the 50s that supposedly came from Tibet, that they believe these reptoid races came from Venus, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, as most people listening know, the surface temperature of Venus is something like 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm really dubious about race living there. Nonetheless, this is part of the tradition.
In more modern times, in the early to mid 20th century, you had the French, of course, who constructed the so-called Maginot Line in eastern France to guard against German invasion. Well, the German invasion happened anyway, and the Maginot Line was not a significant military factor in World War II. The Germans themselves during World War II, and also the Japanese, did a huge amount of underground excavation and construction. There was a military civil engineering organization in the Third Reich called the Todt Organization, T-O-D-T, and it was named after Fritz Todt. Fritz Todt was a brilliant civil engineer. He was the father of the German Autobahn system. During the World War II period, Adolf Hitler asked Fritz Todt to lend his engineering expertise to the military program of the Third Reich, which he did. He established an engineering agency which was called the Todt Organization. Now, Fritz Todt died in a plane crash in 1942 at the height of World War II. And one of his deputies named Xaver Dorsch, Xaverdorsch, took over control of the agency. And one of the things that Hitler tasked Xaver Dorsch was specifically was to embark on an accelerated program of construction of massive deep underground bases for industrial production, for industrial manufacturing in support of the Third Reich's war effort, which he did. However, the war brought an end to that. So after the war, when the Allies, including the Americans, flooded into German-occupied Europe and into Germany itself, they discovered these underground facilities. And the Americans took Xaver Dorsch into detention, and he was actually in American prisoner of war camps for at least a couple of years. The United States Army extensively debriefed Xaver Dorsch. I have a couple of those debriefing documents that he wrote out. I assume that there was a great deal more that I didn't get my hands on and can't, because quite a lot of what happened during and after World War II remains classified to this day. However, I did find a couple of Project Paperclip memos from 1947 that specifically requested Xaver Dorsch by name to be brought to the United States to work on the United States military's underground plant construction program. But he did have a career after World War II. The American military certainly was well aware of who Xaver Dorsch was and his expertise. In his day, he was probably the preeminent authority on underground base construction, whether in Germany or in the United States. And so his services were definitely requested by the United States military after the war, and I suspect that he did come to the United States, but he had a much lower public profile than Werner von Braun, because what the underground base construction program is a very highly secretive and highly secure program that continues to this day. After the war, the United States military embarked on an almost frantic program of deep underground military construction, which continues to this day, and actually my research indicates it continues undersea as well, with underwater bases and tunnels. Lloyd Dulce, the Deputy Director of Engineering and Construction for the United States Army Corps of Engineers, gave a talk at a civil engineering excavation conference at MIT in 1987, where he very plainly spoke about the program of underground construction that the United States military embarked on at the close of World War II. They've never stopped. And in the process of that speech, Dulce said point blank that the United States military has made underground structures, complex, sophisticated underground structures that he cannot discuss publicly, but that are very interesting. So there's no question that the secret underground bases do exist. The United States military has them. Other countries have them as well. And by the way, it's not only the military of the United States or of other countries, who are making these underground and also undersea facilities. Other agencies and organizations do it as well. All that is needed is the requisite will, funding, expert personnel, and technology.
Laboratory. On the southwest part of the Archuleta Mesa, we built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground. Then to the southwest of that, we were in the process of the early stages of building. We drilled 4 large tunnel-like holes.
It is possible to create an underground and or an undersea base virtually anywhere on planet Earth. One of my expert sources told me, when I asked him the same question you just asked me, he said point blank, it's child's play. It's well within the state of the art of modern civil engineering to make a major underground base a mile deep. No problem. That is child's play to make an underground base 1 mile deep. By implication, that suggests it's possible to go even deeper. How much deeper? I don't know, but I've had people tell me that some of the bases are as deep as 10, 12, 14 miles down. I can't prove that. That's what I've been told. But let's just say they can be at least 1 mile deep.
Okay, so if they're 1 mile deep, how would they make that? Like, can you state possibly a piece of technology that you came across in documents you were researching, or? Oh yes. Since at least the 1950s, the mining and civil engineering industries have had the capability to sink major shafts straight down 1, even 2 miles or more, and then to tunnel out from the bottom of these shafts, whether for mining purposes or for other purposes, and create tunnel complexes. Well, the most common form is to use very hard cutting heads on the tunnel boring machines that rotate. It would be like a huge version of the drills used in the petroleum industry and natural gas industry to drill their deep underground boreholes. Only these would be used mostly, not only, but primarily in a horizontal mode, and would have a far larger diameter. But yes, the cutting head would use diamond heads and extremely hard metallic alloys that would cut away the rock and gouge their way through. And then behind the cutting head, there is a system of conveyors that take the crushed rock back behind the machine, and it can be carried away down the tunnel either by conveyors or through a slurry pipe or through narrow gauge railways. All three of these methods are in wide use in the mining industry and underground tunneling industry.
I've heard theories of also nuclear powered drills.
Yes, I cite this technology in my first book. These are called subterranes, S-U-B-T-E-R-R-E-N-E. Subterranes are nuclear powered. They use a small fission nuclear reactor. The nuclear reactor is contained within a machine. It heats up a reservoir of lithium into a liquid form. The lithium is a metal, by the way, but it's heated up and it's circulated tubing through the cutting edge or cutting face of this nuclear tunnel boring machine. This is as described in the patents. And this in turn causes the head of the machine to heat up to about 16 or 1700 degrees Fahrenheit, which then liquefies the rock face of the tunnel and into a molten state. And because of the pressure, mechanical pressure of the machine, as it presses forward the tunnel, it displaces this molten rock and plasters it against the side of the tunnel in a molten vitreous form, so that as the machine moves along, it leaves behind this hot, glassy surface that then cools, and you get a glassy, hard rock glass type of surface to the interior of the tunnel. The research and design was done at Los Alamos National Laboratories back in the 20th century. And right about towards the end of the Vietnam War and coming forward, there was an R&D effort, and there were some patents granted to the research team at Los Alamos. If they are in use, they are being used clandestinely in great secrecy.
There are millions of patents, and very, very few of them actually make it to production. A lot of them don't even work. Is there anything that actually says these are real thermonuclear boring machines?
I went to Bechtel in Las Vegas, Nevada, and put in subterrane, which is what they called one of these, a subterrane, into their computer system. These are images of the subterrane being tested up at Los Alamos Scientific Laboratories. The actual boring tips get superheated and they melt through solid rock. There's no excavation of materials that are needed. The rock penetrates, cracks, and presses liquid molten glass up through a lining all the way around it.
Deep underground military bases. Could there be such a thing? And Phil Schneider, who could believe such testimony? Maybe, in order to understand these extraordinary claims, we must first know who Phil Schneider was.
Well, it looks like Philip grew up in a Navy Armed Force family, because he was all over places with his dad. So one of the places they went to was Washington, D.C. But let's see, while he was young, I think they also went to London.
London, England? What years would that be?
It was in the early 50s, 1950s. And one of the letters that Oscar wrote about the autopsy of the Philadelphia experiment crew member was actually done while he was in London. And what happened was one of the crew members died in Virginia, and he was in London at the time, and he came in from London to Virginia to do the autopsy. So he was like the centralized person. No matter where he was, he had to come in and autopsy the bodies when they died. Philip's father, Oscar, was finding in the Philadelphia experiment. The items that he was pulling out of their back of their eyes and their arms and their legs, these little things that looked like transistors, that's exactly what they were. They were little surveillance items that were placed into the bodies of the Philadelphia experiment crew members. So he was in London, and I think that's when Oscar was working in NATO as well. He was doing a lot of armed force work in NATO. But he kind of knew that his dad was doing a lot of top secret things later on in life.
Phil's father, Oscar Otto Schneider, also was involved in government secrecy and black projects. In the 1990s, during Phil Schneider's lecture tour in the United States, he was known to carry many documents and pictures providing evidence to the testimony about certain controversial subjects he was discussing.
I have a picture of one of the aliens been working for the United States Pentagon for the last 58 years. His name is Val Valiant Thor. He's right here. There's my father in the background. This whole place, the ready room of the USS Eldridge, Al Bielek has probably explained, or maybe even shown you this picture. There's a list of some of the notable people in it. They're all the atomic bomb scientists of the day, all the time variant experimentalists of the day, all the top physicists of that particular day. This was in August of 1943.
4 documents which Phil had carried with him on lecture tour are allegedly from Oscar Schneider while he was in office working for the United States Navy in the 1950s, during which time the alleged Philadelphia experiment took place. These documents are very interesting because they may be a smoking gun to support the theory that in fact the Philadelphia experiment did happen. The first document, which you've already seen, details an autopsy report on one of the crew members from the Philadelphia experiment. That is the USS Eldridge. In this letter to Lieutenant General Nathan F. Twining, it looks like Phil's father, Oscar, is talking about the USS Eldridge again and talking about the search for it after the Philadelphia experiment went wrong and apparently it went missing.
This letter also makes mention of J. Edgar Hoover, former director of the FBI, since 1924 when it was established. He's been said to be part of the UFO conspiracy cover-up.
And in this regard, it's talking about psychological testing of crew members which were found after the DE-173 USS Eldridge reappeared. In this third letter, Edward Condon allegedly is being addressed by Oscar in regards to a mistake where 7 former crew members of the USS Eldridge had escaped from a psychological unit where Oscar had been testing them. Now, what's also interesting in this letter is that J. Edgar Hoover has apparently made this whole incident a 1A prime directive classification, which must mean something in regards to top secret. He also talks about Nikola Tesla's spatial analyzer. So Nikola Tesla has been indicated from numerous sources as part of the Philadelphia experiment. And furthermore, Condon, again, a very notoriously known UFOlogy debunker, who is most infamously known for writing the Condon Report. In the 4th and final letter, Oscar Schneider writes in regards again to the Philadelphia experiment. And I think it speaks for itself. This is what it says. In consideration of the latent facts, in considering the fate of the USS Thurenseth, DE-173, all ships' personnel and material must be quarantined absolute until further notice. No exceptions. An on-site naval inspection is ordered forthwith as Bureau of Ships reticent requirements in Section 93A, please include DE 173's ship's log to Admiral Roscoe Hillenkolt. USN, consider these and all events of nature above secret. C Class ARH-9, Project Blue Sky. Oscar Schneider, Captain, USN.
As Philip grew up, he went to Lincoln High School here in Portland, because I have a transcript of his senior high school. So that was pretty normal, except it does indicate on that transcript that he had an IQ of 163. Now, I know Philip told me that before he had his medical issues, he could speak 11 languages. And I believe that, because he would suddenly, in the middle of the night, sleeping together, he would suddenly start rattling off different languages. And I'm familiar with different languages only because I work with a diverse group at my office for the state of Oregon, where a lot of my coworkers have come from other nations. So this is all though in his sleep, he consciously couldn't remember how to speak those languages, but in his sleep, unconsciously, he could still connect with some of them. There have been 4 years at Duke University. I would say late 60s, he started his work, and then I have Social Security records under a wrong Social Security number, and I think this is how the Black Ops get away with a lot of things, is they put you under the wrong Social Security number so you can't prove your work history with them. But I can prove that under the wrong Social Security number, he worked for Morrison Knudsen, which is a contractor. It's a civilian contractor that works for the Army or Navy, and not unlike what's happening in Iraq today. You hear about all these contractors doing work out there, and then some of them were captured and killed or tortured. That's exactly what was happening back during the Vietnam War. Then he did Dulce, New Mexico, where he was shot in the chest. Then he had to recover. He did some work in Trojan Nuclear after that. By the early 1980s, he was applying for SSI. So I know by the early 1980s, his career is done. He's so injured that he could not do any more work, and his memory is like totally lost as to what he did before. It wasn't until after we got married and he got good medical care and it stopped taking the medications he was taking when I first met him that he started to remember all of the things that are now on the internet. Well, I kind of knew about Philip. I mean, I had met him through the Oregon Agate and Mineral Society in Portland, Oregon, and I had been a past president of the society. We had about 500 members. So, you know, it's a large group of people who came together every other week to study rocks and minerals. And
what year was this?
1985. I was at the Oregon Agate and Mineral Society meeting. And Philip came in and he was on crutches and he had his leg bandaged from top to bottom, hobbling in, and he sat down next to me and we got to talking, and I told him about how I wanted to go on this vacation, and he offered to watch my dog while I was gone on my vacation, and I thought that was so nice of him. So I drove him home. He lived way far away from the meeting place. He lived in downtown Portland. And when we came into his apartment, he had this big chalkboard, a big giant one, and it had a drawing of what looked like a little space shuttle or something, and a big dotted line that went and connected with it. And there were a whole bunch of formulas. I mean, like, He was way into whatever it was he was looking at. And I asked him about it. He said that was the Challenger, which had just exploded. And he was telling me how a cosmosphere had shot it down. But he really started to introduce me to the Black Ops, to the world that's different than what we know.
Hello, Marie.
Hi. Want a squirt?
Lots of food, soft drink.
There you go.
So tell me when did Phil start telling you about his past and his work?
It was soon after I determined that the Dilantin that he was taking was actually killing him rather than helping him. He kept saying that he had to take Dilantin to prevent seizures. But I noticed when he took Dilantin, he would have a seizure. It was the other way around. It was actually killing him. And it was disrupting him emotionally, physically, so much that he didn't have much of a memory of anything in his past. And then after we were married, he got really good medical care. It slowly started to come back. I mean, it was like, he would even say to me, gee, I hope you don't think I'm like blind because I'm just remembering this, but wow, you know, these things start coming up and I just suddenly remember what's really happened. And he talked about his friend Ron. I met Ron early on before Philip and I got married.
What year do you think that was?
I would say 2 years before he was murdered, so we're talking 94. I know he was out on the lecture tour by then. But that's really when it started. When Oscar died, it might have been 94, Philip went down into his basement, found a file cabinet full of stuff that was just unbelievable. And he showed me most of that. I mean, I saw the original envelopes with the original paperwork that had the drawings on it. I saw the original photographs with the stamps on the back from the Navy. I mean, it was all real stuff. This was not faked. He shared so much with me, even though we were divorced at the time. So I saw all this stuff that came out of the file cabinet. But he'd been talking to Ron about it a lot. They were doing a little alien magazine, a little digest. And then his dad died and he found all this stuff in the basement. Well, Ron was murdered that same year. And that infuriated Philip. He says, how dare they come in and kill my friends?
Knutson or any of these other big companies have anything to do with the construction of these underground facilities?
I spent years going through reams of technical documentation from the military-industrial complex. I just accumulated thousands and thousands of pages of it. And Morrison Knutson is one of those that would pop up in the bibliographies, along with companies like Parsons, Fingerhoff, Clay and Douglas, Hewitt, Black and Vetch. You won't easily find this stuff on the internet. I found these documents by going to federal document repositories at major university libraries in the United States and also to federal agency document repositories. Of course, you have two military agencies, the Army Corps of Engineers, which is definitely involved in constructing underground bases and tunnels. It has been for more than half a century. You also have the U.S. Navy Seabees, who also work in underground and undersea construction. Those would be the lead military agencies, but there are large corporations that are involved. The Bechtel Corporation is one. Then you have the tunnel boring machine companies such as the Robbins Company in Yelm, Washington. the Lovac tunnel boring machine. A number of these companies, which for decades have worked very closely with not only the United States military agencies, but also other agencies in construction of underground facilities and tunnels, and also, well, highly trained engineers, funding. They provide facilities, construction facilities and administrative facilities, not only in the United States, but in the case of these larger companies all around the world. And you have to understand that the American government and the American military agencies and also other organizations that the American government, whether on the civil side or the military side, interface with, have a global reach. They have a global scope of operations. So when they embark on any major project, including the construction of undersea and or underground bases, tunnels, and facilities of any kind, they need to work with other agencies and corporations that are able to operate internationally. From a logistical standpoint, they have the capability to move machinery, personnel, and money around the world. When you're involved in a large project, you may need to move hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of funding around the world, from country to country, from city to city, to subsidiaries, in between various government agencies. So you need to have a sophisticated accounting operation, for one thing. You need to be able to move personnel around. So you need to have a company that's able to get visas and work permits and find housing and transportation and medical care and on for a workforce. And you also need to be able to move machinery around, ships, tunnel boring machines, the materials that you'll need, stainless steel, structural steel, concrete. These are massive undertakings, and to do that you need to have large organizations with a bureaucratic and administrative structure that's capable of supporting projects like this. So that's why you have these large corporations involved. With these corporations, it's like a shell game, and it's harder and harder to find out who is working for whom and what they're doing and under what conditions. The so-called Morrison Knudsen is now owned by something called URS as of 4 years ago, 2007. So you see that when I say I'm not sure Morrison Knudsen exists per se anymore, it's been enveloped. It makes it hard to follow what they're doing and to follow the money and the contracts, because the names in the corporate alliances are constantly changing in a state of flux at a very high level.
Could you also maybe lend to the audience some examples of real underground facilities?
The most famous one would be under Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, which used to be the NORAD headquarters. Now it's a backup NORAD base. NORAD has moved to Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado, not far away. But that would be the most famous one. I guess it's appeared in many movies. It is large, it is sophisticated, it is deep. Then you also have the famous FEMA underground base beneath Mount Weather in Northern Virginia. It's run by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's also quite deep, sophisticated, large. It amounts to an actual small town, deep underground. There are others. There's so-called Site R complex that is the Pentagon's alternate command center, which is underground on the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania. And
Then, of course, you have the well-known Area 51 facility. There's been quite a lot of underground tunneling excavation done there. Many people have spoken about facilities out there. And then there are other ones that are perhaps less well-known. The NSA in Laurel, Maryland. Of course, NSA is the National Security Agency. Has a very large, deep, sophisticated facility beneath its base, which is at Fort Meade. Fort Meade is an armed facility, but the NSA is actually the major activity there. And there are just literal acres, multiple acres of supercomputers beneath Fort Meade that go down and down and down, level after level. I've been told 20 levels, maybe more. And then Los Alamos National Lab in northern New Mexico. Then you have Camp David in Maryland. Many people are familiar with Camp David as a United States presidential retreat where presidents often helicopter to for rest and relaxation. But less commonly known is that there is a massive underground facility that spreads out for miles. Another underground facilities beneath Washington, D.C. There are miles of tunnels beneath Washington, D.C. of many kinds, and including beneath the White House, there's a vast, deep underground facility beneath the White House. It's been there for at least since the 1960s. It's very deep, multiple levels, and stretches out a long ways. I spoke to one person who was in it back in the 1960s. And the part she was in, she entered a corridor that was 17 levels beneath the White House.
Could you name like a underground military base that the United States has built in another country?
Well, for example, in the run-up to the first war against Iraq, Bechtel built 3 deeply buried, sophisticated underground facilities in Saudi Arabia. They were used during the war, the first war. Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the American military commander, spent most of that war underground in Saudi Arabia. Switzerland, the Swiss Alps are just tunneled out. I've heard them described as being excavated like Swiss cheese, as full of holes as Swiss cheese. And the Chinese, it has come to light that the Chinese have constructed something like 3,000 miles of underground tunnels to house their nuclear arsenal. And the Chinese have also, on Hainan Island, which is off the southern Chinese coast, constructed a vast underground naval base that accommodates ocean-going military vessels, both surface vessels and also submarine. The Chinese bring submarines from the China Sea into this underground base on shore, and they bring the submarines in underwater through massive underwater tunnels. I've read that there are 11 of these tunnels. So there's some examples. This is not restricted to the United States, of course.
What's the point? Well, what's the benefit of building all of these bases in and around the world? What is it for? Is it for keeping things secret? And what are they keeping secret? Is it for keeping things away from the public? And then, is it also for protection in some way? Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, to all of that. All of those are considerations. The motivation for going deep underground and or deep undersea is often driven by concerns of security and secrecy. Weapons production and storage happens underground, whether for nuclear weapons or other kinds. This has been going on ever since the World War II period. You also have scientific research facilities underground. The CERN Super Collider on the border of Switzerland and France would be a good example. That one is very much publicly known and discussed. There are other underground research facilities, including at Area 51 and elsewhere, that operate much more out of the public eye. There are many rumors
about clandestine extraterrestrial facilities, both underground and undersea. And a growing number of people have come forward over the years with anecdotal accounts of having seen and or been taken into such facilities by a variety of reasons, both by extraterrestrials and also by shadowy elements of the United States military, by clandestine units. I do take these stories seriously. I do believe that these types of facilities exist. What are the reasons that they would be here and underground? Again, for secrecy, for security, and for purposes of communication, command, and control. The same reasons that the United States military builds underground bases.
It has absorbed ufology. It has absorbed all the other disciplines: paleoanthropology, paleoarchaeology, astrobiology, mythology. Everything is coming under the umbrella of exopolitics, because in the old style ufology, the government would interfere with the physical evidence. You take the evidence to the government lab, say, I have a bit of material from a craft, and they would confiscate it, and they say it never existed. But with exopolitics, we are able to have a platform where qualitative measures are acceptable. We use them just the same way as with your legal system. If you have a murder and there's no body, you can still get convicted based on the witness testimony. And I would say that's the essence of exopolitics. Am I speaking too fast? No. Okay, just tell me.
Richard Sala has investigated these deep underground bases. Some of them are actually carved into the side of underground mountains under the sea. Quite a few abductees, quite a few military abductees that I've investigated in my labs spoken of these deep underground bases where humans with their supposedly their back-engineered technology. In some cases, extraterrestrials that have witnessed in joint human ET technology transfer programs, which might involve, to some extent, mind control techniques. Certainly, they've given the secret government certain technologies in exchange for certain privileges, perhaps on the planet. We don't really know the exact details of these agreements. Phil Schneider was definitely there. He was one of the engineers that was responsible for creating these underground bases. And I don't have any reason to doubt that at some point he actually tunneled into perhaps a section of the base where he shouldn't have, where there were off-worlders. And of course, when you have somebody from the outside coming into direct contact with these beings under the ground who have their own hierarchies, it leads to some sort of conflict. Now, I have no doubt that some kind of shootout took place. I mean, we know Phil Schneider has actually showed me severe wounds, cuts down his chest, down his stomach, his hands. So he definitely had some sort of altercation with extraterrestrials for these bases. These, as I've said in the presentation, these beings are, to some extent, some of them are indigenous, some are not indigenous. They're manipulating the financial system, and just simply by empowering the elite, empowering the military through technology, they can literally do what they like, whether the military agrees or not. And this is obviously the case that human politics are spurred on by extraterrestrial interference, and we know that's where they prefer to be, underground.
Okay, so further to that question, how does a truth embargo on ETs affect global consciousness, reality as we know it, and the evolution of man?
Well, the truth embargo, first of all, anything that limits your consciousness or your intelligence is going to keep you pretty much in the same place. Vertical evolution. What we're actually suffering from is not only technical evolution, but a lack of spiritual evolution, which is caused by the same truth embargo. So, the whole point about the truth embargo is that you are not meant to know that there are higher life forms. You're not meant to know that there are alternatives to energy. You're not meant to know that there are 101 other methods of doing many things we take for granted on this planet. And as long as you're kept in the dark, you're not aware of these other technologies, you will continue to benefit from the pockets of the elites who expect you to go out and spend your money on oil and fuel and pay through the nose. Everything you do on this planet, you buy an orange, that orange is going to be cultivated, it takes energy, it's going to be picked, it takes energy, it's going to be tracked, it takes energy, it's going to be shipped, it takes energy. When you get it, you take it home, it takes energy. So everything is revolving around oil. They don't want you to know that oil is not necessary. It's a multi-zillion, quadrillion industry. And they kill for it. Because we are not aware of 99.9% of our reality. We're only aware, as I said to you in my talk about the politics of ontology, as Dr. John Mack said, the Harvard psychiatrist. Our reality is determined by a handful of people using those pillars of the worldview I explained to you as the education system, financial system, the military-industrial complex, the intelligence operatives, etc. They are determining what's true, what's not true, what's real, what's not real. They make the press, who totally fail us, it's not a pillar of the worldview, ridicule the subject. And yet, we know it's totally true. You've seen at this conference, everybody is like most of the people that see UFOs themselves.
The main topic of my discussion here is to link up basically what's going on with these deep underground military bases, what they're being used for, what is the present situation now being employed both by our federal government, which is slowly being phased out by the United Nations government, as well as the New World, end quote, the New World Order, which is an even higher entity, and who these higher entities are taking their orders from.
Well, one question that arises is whether or not there is the legendary, much talked about deal between human government groups and non-humans, the human alien deal. This idea was put out really first in the late 1980s by John Lear. You know, all I can say at this point is that anything is possible. I do believe that there are a number of other beings that are here, other beings, whatever they are. There were rumors going right back to the 1950s about, for example, President Eisenhower supposedly meeting with non-humans. These rumors came out almost immediately after the fact in 1954. There have been a number of individuals who have claimed to have been present or who have been at Edwards Air Force Base in California where Eisenhower supposedly met with ETs back in 1954. Crazy as it sounds, I think it's possible. So if that is possible, is it then possible that such a deal went wrong? For example, what would the deal have included? It could have included we humans getting certain technologies and knowledge from them in exchange for them having the ability to do certain things in our society without us giving them a hassle for it. For them having a permanent base somewhere, maybe in Nevada. For them every now and then taking a human being to examine them, but then returning them. This is the claim of the human alien deal. And the claim, furthermore, is that we learned during the 70s and 80s that they were not abiding by their agreement, that they were taking humans, not telling us, not telling the human government, and so forth. None of this, I have any idea if this is true or not. I have no idea. I try to deal with facts, I try to deal with confirmed data. This is not confirmed. You got to keep it open. What I would say is that it would very much be in the interest of a visiting race to make a deal with the U.S. government. Why not? Sure, they might be able to wipe us out if they felt like it, but maybe that's too much of a hassle for them. Maybe it's just a lot easier to deal with the local governing power. And so it would make sense to make an arrangement with the local strongman, which would be the U.S. military, U.S. government. And if you really want to get, subterranean here, so to speak, there would be a lot of benefit from a visiting race of extraterrestrials to exploit Earth and humanity to the max. A lot of folks in this field believe that any visiting ET race would, by their nature, be peaceful and nonviolent. I never agreed with this. I don't understand at all why, just because you have better technology, then that means you're nicer. You can be just as exploitative. Look at human history. We've got great technology these days. It doesn't mean we're any less exploitative than people were 5,000 years ago. Where would they be? Well, look, if you come from someplace that's not here, really makes sense, doesn't it, to create a secure environment for yourself, probably under the ground. It's the best place to be. Think about it. If you evolved in an environment that's different from Earth, we humans, we belong here. We are used to the specific solar radiation that we get. We're used to the microbes that live here on Earth with us. The specific, all the features of planet Earth are suitable for human beings. They may not be as suitable for some other type of species that didn't come from here. When I go through the various witness reports, alleged reports of encounters that people have had with these other entities, that also reinforces my opinion that we're dealing with multiple groups. So at this point in the game, my working assumption is that humanity right now is interacting really on a covert basis with multiple highly intelligent non-human groups that are here. And they're here for purposes that might very well be quite varied. It's not necessarily the case that they all have one agenda. Now, some of these groups, some of these entities, according to, again, witness accounts, are like the prototypical Greys, that is the short, humanoid, large black eyes, big head, spindly arms, and so on. Another type of non-human that's been discussed are reptoid types, that is, large, kind of intimidating reptilian creatures. Yet another type that's been reported are what we might call mantid or insectoid type creatures. All of this is bizarre, and you might ask yourself, well, what's going on? But yet these reports are consistent across many, many years and many different types of people. Some who are utterly ignorant of the lore or of the literature about this, and they still report these sane, ordinary people. So that gives me pause. That makes me really wonder if these reports are consistent with some of the more ancient myths that people have reported back in earlier times.
There's a number of you ladies present, so I won't gore you out, but Al has seen some of the wounds, and there's a few other people that have been to a few of my other lectures, and they can attest that I have been shot. I've been run off the road. I've been pushed off the road. I've been mostly shot at.
11 of my best friends in the last 22 years have been murdered. 8 of them called suicide. I finally got wind of one of them. Portland police is now involved in one of them. Murder by suicide, I call it. My friend Ronald Lee Rummel was an Air Force officer. He's a Silver Star winner. There's a good chance that when I fly back to Vegas, I have to drive home. I left my car down in Vegas. I have to drive home alone. I'm scared to hell.
Look, let's get right down to it. When you're dealing with something of the magnitude of what it appears to be, that is the presence of a variety of non-humans here on Earth that are here for some sort of agenda, and everything else that goes along with that, including possible collaboration by various human groups with them. This is obviously incredibly explosive material. And so it goes without saying that the intelligence agencies, the deep black agencies, black ops groups that are involved in this would need to keep this as quiet as possible. They would have to, for their own preservation. So in other words, secrecy becomes the ultimate goal for this, and that means secrecy, in theory, forever. Forever. Secrecy forever. Which means, furthermore, that, if there are leaks that are going to come out about this, you have to find a way to disable those leaks. Either by disabling the information or the individual behind it. It doesn't have to be by killing them. It could be by ruining their reputation, by discrediting them in one way or another. That's just as good. But, fifth, that there's the ultimate way to silence someone, and that's by snuffing their life out. Certainly, one thing that we know in the last 60, 70 years is that assassination techniques have become very, very sophisticated. Very sophisticated. The art of suiciding someone, that is, killing them, making it be a suicide. This is widespread. It's been widespread for many years. During the days of the Cold War, the KGB was very good at this. But guess what? So was the CIA. We have many cases of this happening. To this day, you're not going to get the CIA to admit it, but we know that this happened. It happened in the case of a fellow named Frank Olson in the early 1950s, who had been a biological warfare expert, who was given LSD without knowledge by a CIA friend. Well, Olson had a very bad trip. Long story short, he was taken to a large hotel in New York City, the 10th floor, and was thrown out the window. It made it seem like a suicide. It was no suicide. Olson was killed because he'd become a security risk. This is an old game. So back to our scenario here of multiple non-human groups with possible human-alien interaction going on. This is a secret that has to be kept from their point of view. And anyone who threatens that secrecy has got to be handled, whether by discrediting that person or failing all else by killing.
This is an account of Phil's death, a case which reeks of suspicion, disregard, and neglect of duty. The first official police report identifies Phil's cause of death to be of natural causes. On January 17, 1996, Deputy Officer McClelland is alerted by a suspicious apartment manager that he has not seen Phil for weeks. Officer McClelland finds Phil's body on the floor beside his bed with his face in the seat of the wheelchair. Medical examiner Mr. Coleman will not respond to the crime scene. Phil had been dead for 3 to 4 days. His body is then whisked away to a funeral home. January 18th, Mr. Took calls from the funeral home to alert the police he has found a catheter cord wrapped around Phil's neck. Detective Hagen investigates further on January 18th. He calls medical examiner Coleman and Sergeant Joyce, who both elect not to respond. Upon further investigation, while interrogating Deputy McClelland, the deputy recalls the catheter cord being near Phil's neck at the scene of the crime, but cannot make sense of it. It is explained in the report that the only person that could be around Phil during those days was a woman from the Oregon Senior and Disabled Services. Other things found inside the apartment include 7 pill medications and 1 liquid cough syrup. An autopsy is to be held by Dr. Gunson on January 19th. Detectives Harris and Kennel are assigned to the case. The autopsy report describes Phil's death as by asphyxiation. Dr. Gunson goes on to say that neck wounds will be described below, but no descriptions of neck wounds are given. Later in the report, the doctor describes there being no neck wounds and no sign of struggle. The stomach material shows no sign of pills. Blood and urine are placed on a 3-month hold. The catheter cord is described as being wrapped around Phil's neck once and then tied from the front, very tight. Now, you must ask yourself, how can Phil not have hung himself and be found dead by strangulation on the floor with his face in the seat of his own wheelchair inside his apartment? Is this something you could do yourself? Is this something he could have done himself without taking any pills in order to sedate or pass out? Even worse, the blood and urine that was put on a 3-month hold is reported by Dr. Gunson to Cynthia as being further on hold for 1 year. When Cynthia follows up after a year, they are said to be lost, so there is no way to prove that Phil was knocked out by any chemicals. So what do we have here? Do we have a murder, or do we have a suicide? On January 19th, the case is closed. Phil's death has been changed to death by suicide. This is further indicated in his death certificate. Something of more suspicion in regards to the news of his death, maybe in order to further cover it up. An obituary is given to the newspaper, not by Cynthia, and it states that Phil Schneider had died by natural causes.
This is it, dudes. This is what we came to see.
No Navy planes that we could see.
There were no jets, no planes at any kind, no helicopters. We did see something, in fact, we did see something right around 5:45, and around 5:50, that's when we saw the first saucer come out of Area 51. Right. It stayed around for about 10 minutes, and then it went back down.
Right.
And then the other two came out. We thought they were trucks. We did.
We really did.
We got news whatsoever. Well, that's now. We'll call Georgie.
He wrote a number of interesting articles called Alien Digest. His death was called suicide. It's now being reinvestigated as a homicide. 2 of 3 people have been implicated. One was got 2 in custody. One was an NSA and one was a TF fellow, or they were retired. And they didn't like what this person was doing, and so I guess they decided to rid me. He's my best friend. I grew up in. I knew him for the better part of 30 years. He's about the most honest person. He came clean with everything. If he didn't know 100%, he didn't talk about it.
Author Ron Rummel was about to publish a book revealing what he believed to be the real purpose of the Star Wars project when his body was found here in McClay Park in Portland, Oregon. His death was ruled suicide, but few agree with that verdict.
As far as the police and the FBI are concerned, it's case closed. Unfortunately, there's the shocking thing that his murderer, I believe his murderer is still out there at large.
Why is it you're speaking out?
There have been enough lives taken under the premise of suicide when they were actually very stable individuals. They had families and they had lives to look forward to, and they had every reason to live. And if there is some form of conspiracy out there, then the more people that are talking might end up saving lives in the long run. Probably the reason I got shot to pieces and 11 attempts on my life is I am a direct threat to the entire system. The New World Order, the alien agenda is one and the same. It's world takeover and the decimation of the population of this planet.